The upcoming November 2020 election has certainly been filled with political drama, issues, and controversy. Today, Brian Sobel is going to speak about the candidates and issues, as well as the operations that go on behind the scenes in an election year. A little bit about Brian's biography. He's been a communications consultant for over 30 years, helping corporate companies and other entities with their government-related and other issues. Brian Sobel is a former vice mayor of Petaluma and a former candidate for state assembly. And he's currently a member of the board of directors of the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District. He's also chairman of the board of directors for the Bank of Marin. Brian Sobel is known as a keen observer of the political arena, and he's often been asked to contribute his analysis of candidates and political issues on media outlets such as KTVU Channel 2 in Oakland. And Brian is an author. He's written numerous articles on military-related subjects, and he's the author of 2 books and an anthology, including a book on the well-known General George S. Patton and his son, also a general. That book is entitled The Fighting Pattons. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you very much. And we are going to talk about the 2020 election. And this year, like frankly, every presidential election year is tumultuous, important, and people are glued to the election around the country because these elections, as we often hear, have consequences. And this year is no different than past years. We are looking at an election where we have an incumbent president, Donald Trump, who has been a most interesting ride for 4 years, different than most presidents we have experienced in our lifetimes, who wasn't really a Republican when you think about it, when all this started. He is more of an independent, a public figure, but needed a party to run on. Very much like Bernie Sanders. People often ask me about Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. I say, in one respect, they're exactly the same. Both come from outside the political system. Bernie Sanders is a progressive socialist who's not a Democrat. He utilized the Democratic Party to make a run for the presidency of the United States. Ditto Donald Trump. Donald Trump also was never a real Republican, but he was more Republican than anything else, and he was able to utilize the Republican Party as a vehicle to move towards the presidency, which he attained. Fast forward to more than 3 years later, and it's almost election time. We are less than, or a little just over, actually, a couple of weeks away from the election, and there is so much at stake. We have 2 candidates in Donald Trump and Joe Biden, former vice president of the United States. Joe Biden is well known to Americans. It's well known that he's spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. He was a vice president, as we know. He was a senator. Some of my earliest memories, because I've spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., are of a fellow in Joe Biden who loved people. He was out in the hallways all the time. I met him many times. The first question he'd ask is, "Where are you from?" And he generally knew exactly the district that you lived in. In fact, he was out in the hallways so often in so many places that the joke in Washington, D.C. was that Joe Biden would attend the opening of an envelope. So that is the Joe Biden that we've known for a lot of years, a person who's been involved in the public arena. That's completely different than this populist president who really was able to galvanize a lot of people to vote for him, because a lot of people feel as though government has gotten away from their control and grasp. And Donald Trump really tied into that in 2016. And frankly, because I think what we learned in post-campaign analysis, Hillary Clinton had some rather significant holes in her campaign that allowed Donald Trump to go right through to victory. For example, not campaigning in Wisconsin was a huge mistake by Hillary Clinton. She believed and her staff believed that Wisconsin was not in play for her, but it turned out to be in play for her. Or you take something like Pennsylvania. Donald Trump, this is interesting if you think about it. Donald Trump won Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes. 44,000 votes out of millions that were cast, and a margin of less than 1%. About 6 million votes were cast in 2016, and he won by 44,000 votes. You often hear people say, well, I don't want to vote, and my vote isn't worth anything. Well, in Pennsylvania, every vote counted, because that margin of victory, that 1% margin of victory, helped Donald Trump significantly on the way to the White House. I happen to be doing TV the night of the election returns and the election of Donald Trump as president. And it was remarkable to sit and watch these states as they started moving in Donald Trump's favor, and one after the other. The entire Rust Belt went with Donald Trump. Other states throughout the nation going to Donald Trump, and it was remarkable at the time. The Clinton campaign people, whom I knew then, know now, were stunned, absolutely stunned. But Donald Trump, if you'll recall, in the last weeks of the 2016 campaign, was doing 3, 4, 5 campaign events a day. Now, as we look at 2020, we see a president hobbled by COVID off the campaign trail, in contrast to the vice president, who did not get onto the campaign trail for the longest time because of a fear of the COVID spread, trying to respect, as he called it, the science of COVID and not being out mixing with people. Donald Trump took a completely different view of that. And I think some would agree that some people within his orbit, obviously, paid the price, because within those people in and around Donald Trump, many had an experience with COVID, including the president. And COVID this year is an absolutely huge campaign issue. Now, let's just go back a little bit and talk about the pluses and minuses of these national candidates. Donald Trump is somebody who announced very early his interest in certain subjects, how he was going to deal with China, how he was going to deal with trade, with tariffs, with immigration, to some extent with the Middle East, to the economy, which was a favorite of his. He laid all those things out in the campaign. And I think, as I try to be fair among all candidates, we have to fairly say that Donald Trump did not mislead the American people about what he was going to work on. And he went out and he did do that for the most part. And to his credit, the economy before the onset of COVID was booming. Now, you can argue that the economy was set in place, by and large, the success of the economy, by the Obama-Biden administration coming into Donald Trump. But in this country, we give credit or demerits to the person in office. So Donald Trump has to get credit for the economy. It did well under him. It did well for Black Americans, for Latino and Hispanic Americans, and other groups that didn't perform as well under other administrations. He gets credit for that. The thing that has held Donald Trump back, and this is my opinion, is that he spent way too much time trying to go over the head of the media and other people via Twitter and other digital platforms to take his case on whatever subject he was expounding on directly to the American people. Well enough, except for many of his tweets irritated different blocks of Americans. And one thing you learn in politics very early is that over time, you're going to upset an increasing number of people. And therefore, your time in office is almost self-limited by how many different subjects you tackle and how many people decide at some point they don't like you. And eventually, as good a politician as you may be, you you only have so many credits in the political bank, as it were. And Donald Trump, for his part, because of these tweets, really came to a place, I think, over the last year where people at first were, I think his base anyway, really supported a lot of his tackling the draining of the swamp and these other things. I think he was hitting enough people on the fringes that a lot of people turned against him, not necessarily against his policies, but against him. This is all important because Joe Biden, in turn, has been somebody who has been kind of the get along guy throughout his career, very magnanimous to various groups. I think that played well for Biden, even as he wasn't coming out and campaigning with people across the country. But in fairness, one of the issues that that really started looming large early on in the Biden campaign was whether Joe Biden at 78, even though Trump is 74, whether at 78, he could handle the rigors of the presidency of the United States. And there were rumors and other things coming out of his camp and other camps that he was having some cognitive issues. And of course, his camp publicly has denied that. But I've had Democrats of high standing say that it's worrisome, but they think they could get beyond it because Biden will be surrounded by really great people. That's their feeling. And we won't know. We won't know until he's elected or not. But if he's elected, we'll find out soon enough who his cabinet is and who the people are that are around him that are supporting his work as president of the United States. So a lot of pluses for both of these candidates, a lot of negatives as well. And if you want to know somebody who knows the inside of Washington, D.C., Joe Biden is your man. If you want somebody who talks about and works appears to work against some of the status quo, perhaps Donald Trump is your person. So big decisions coming up in the coming days. The vice presidency is a question that looms larger this year than in any year in recent memory. And that's the reason. And the reason is because of the ages of both of these contenders for the presidency. People are having to look this year more at the vice presidential candidates than probably in the past. You know, we've had 45 presidents, we've had 48 vice presidents. And so the vice presidents, in a couple of cases, were just, they moved them along. In this case, Mike Pence stayed on the ticket for Donald Trump, and Joe Biden selected Kamala Harris, who in California we know well. She's held public office here for many, many years and is now the United States senator from California, along with Dianne Feinstein. We have two senators, as you know. And so Kamala Harris is a known entity out here. She was not known across the country, and she is only now getting better known across the country. And I think people see her as bright, accomplished. She has some issues in polling with likability. People tend to think that she isn't the most likable person. I think she's working on that. But first and foremost, I think people are looking at her and saying, do I see in Kamala Harris the president of the United States? Because there's every chance that this could occur, as it is throughout history. It can happen. One can look back at Harry Truman, who basically was out of the loop in the Roosevelt administration until he was vice president. One vice president along the way had a great line about the vice presidency, and it was something along the lines of, as vice president, I am nothing, but I could be something. And that's what people are looking at this year with respect to Kamala Harris. Mike Pence is a known entity, and he is somebody that most Americans have an opinion about. But Kamala Harris is quickly trying to assert herself as somebody who could step in to the top office and do a great job. when we think about California, California is a blue state. Trump has already lost in California. California has been decided, and all 55 Electoral College votes in California, because it's a winner-take-all state, will go to Joe Biden. 48 of the 50 states, including Washington, D.C., are winner-take-all states. And excuse me. And so there are a number of states that aren't even in play. And you need a reminder of 538 electoral college votes are at play and 270 to win. Reminder, Trump won in 2016 with 304 votes to 227 for Hillary Clinton. However, Clinton, as we know, won the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes. This has always rankled people who were supporting Hillary Clinton. It's the argument about the importance of the Electoral College versus accepting the popular vote. That's a discussion for a different day. But those two things were very much at play or in play in 2016. Go back to the Al Gore, George W. Bush race. Al Gore also, in the popular vote, won that race by about 500,000 votes. So this is an ongoing discussion. I think we'll continue having it. It's about proportional representation, or just deciding that it's going to be a count of the number of American voters who go to the polls and vote. We will obviously watch that issue in the coming years around whether there will be reform of the Electoral College. That's something to think about. The polling, as we are heading into the last days of this campaign, right now on this Sunday morning, show that Joe Biden is leading the race. He is leading the race on a national basis, but people like me don't look at these races on a national basis because of the Electoral College. And the Electoral College requires us to look at state-by-state voting. And so I look at how Biden is doing state by state, and he's doing well. He is not in a position where Trump cannot catch him. He's roughly in the same position today, give or take, in various states, somewhere around where Hillary Clinton was in her standing. She was ahead of Donald Trump, and it just faded in the last days because of a vigorous campaign by Donald Trump. And at that time, Hillary Clinton kind of laying back this idea that I don't want to make any mistakes coming down the stretch because I lead. Well, sometimes we know that sitting on a lead isn't the best thing. I would use sports as a metaphor there. You have to keep your foot on the gas, and that's that's also true in politics. Again, the Rust Belt will be important. States like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, Ohio, Texas, all will be in play and all very important to the outcome of this race. We already know several states and where it's going to go, but the final tally will come from these states that are in play right now. In the remaining time before the election, there will be continuing discussion about the president's handling of COVID and whether the American public has confidence in his ability to steer us through the remainder of this crisis, however long it takes to come out the other end, and whether he handled it well on the front end. There is the social justice movement that continues to be a major part of this campaign right now. The argument over law enforcement and where we go with race relations in the United States. We still have the aftermath of the Russian interference in the 2016 election. We have arguments about trade in China, with China, and where China stands in all of this. And the situation in the Middle East with Iran and their ongoing attempt to become a nuclear nation, also very big. And then there's the economy. And the economy always looms over these elections. I'll take you back to George Herbert Walker Bush in 1992. He's coming off the Gulf War. He's got a public approval rating of 91%, highest in history. He's just won a war. He's done everything. And the Democrats are looking everywhere for a candidate to run against Bush for his second term. And they can't get anybody who can really, in their view, take him on. So this governor from a small state, Arkansas, decides, I'll run. But in a brilliant move, he says, I've studied history. I know that after wars come a time for peace and a refocus on the economy. And Bill Clinton went hard at George Herbert Walker Bush on the economy. It's the economy, stupid. It's, was kind of a phrase that was, being bandied about at that time. The Republican administration kept focusing on international events. It was George Bush's strong suit, but Clinton kept up the pressure. And at the end of the day, he ends up winning the presidency of the United States. And we think about, these kinds of situations in history, internationally. We know what happened to Winston Churchill after he won the war, for the Brits. His party was tossed out of office because it's true that after a war, people are fatigued. Even a short war that wasn't terribly traumatic in many respects for the United States. It was a war we built up to. We did well, and we ended it quickly. But still, that causes so much anxiety in society that people want to go back to a place where we're concentrating on domestic issues, on economic issues. Well, again, this is loomed as an issue with the impact of COVID. But Donald Trump has tried to shift people back to pre-COVID when the economy was doing well, and saying that when we get through COVID, we're going to be fine again. It's going to be great for everybody in our economy. So it really comes down to turnout in the election. The states that I've already mentioned coming through and voting for Biden if Biden is to win. And when I speak of turnout, it's something to think about because, in one case, for decades, Latino Hispanic voters have been cast as a sleeping giant. But their turnout has lagged about 20% behind that of white and Black voters. Less than half of eligible Latino Hispanic voters went to the polls in 2016. We'll have to see what their turnout is. If they turn out strongly for Joe Biden, if Black Americans turn out strongly for Joe Biden, if young people who talk a good game every election but don't necessarily turn out, if they turn out, Biden can win this somewhat handily. But we'll see. Trump is back on the campaign trail, and he's got a few days left. The difference this year is also the amount of mail-in balloting. We probably don't have a lot of time today to talk about that. We can maybe talk about it more in the Q&A section of this talk. But the thing we remember if we're a little older is absentee ballots. And absentee ballots were always cast or typically cast is a better word, by seniors, by those who couldn't get out of their house very easily to get to the polls, or people who didn't choose to go to the polls. That shifted over the last few years to what is now mail-in ballots. Now everybody can sit in their house, quietly go over their ballot, here in California anyway, quietly go over their ballot, fill it out, mail it in. This has caused some angst, obviously, among Republicans who think that that system can be otherwise impeded in favor, in this case, of those voting for Joe Biden. Mail-in balloting has been going on for a long time in many states. And so we'll see what happens this year and whether the turnout is greater. But that is why you're seeing the campaigns develop in a different way. In the old days, you had a bifurcated campaign. You had a campaign that was directed at seniors and other people who would likely vote by absentee ballots. And then you'd see the second surge that dealt with people who were going to the polls. That's something in the past now. Now you see a continuous campaign to attract voters to vote almost as soon as they get their mail-in ballots. And we know statistically up to this time, people will vote fairly quickly after getting their mail-in ballots, sometimes 48, 72 hours. They've already filled them out and mailed them back. So campaigns take all of this into account. I do want to, because so many of my talks involve history and presidential campaigns and other things, because I think history is our guide. The things we're seeing today, we've seen before. Mark Twain is reputed as saying, we don't really know, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and it does. Almost everything we face has happened in some way, shape, or form before. I remember talking about this when Donald Trump was elected. Completely different mold than previous presidents. No political experience, business person, TV celebrity. It reminded me very much of the candidacy and election of Andrew Jackson, 7th president of the United States. You know, he wasn't one of those people that came from the mold of our founders. You know, the Upper East Coast people and down into Virginia that were our first presidents, mainly Virginia, to be honest with you. He came from all the way out in the West, Tennessee, and he was considered radical. And there were people at the time that wrote that he was going to be the last president we'd ever have because he'd ruin the nation. There were many people that were so strongly against Jackson because he, again, wasn't the kind of president that people were used to. And that was Donald Trump. And we've had examples of these through our history. Every time somebody points something out about how we're being tested in a different way, I say, yes, we're being tested in a different way. But there are predicates. There are things that have happened in our history that were different in almost the same way as we're seeing them today. But interestingly, you know, there have been nearly a dozen in our history one-term presidents who ran for second terms but were denied by the voters, and that may happen with Donald Trump. But only 3 one-term presidents since World War II, and the most recent one, of course, being George Herbert Walker Bush, and that's been over 3 decades ago. So if it were to happen, it hasn't happened in a long time, and we expect the voter turnout is going to be heavy. The casting of votes across the country will be state by state, very large. But I also, before I close, I want to talk about the fact that there are a lot of down ticket issues of importance for us in California. We're going to elect members of Congress, the state Senate, the state assembly, and local offices of all types. And the reason to get out and vote, or to vote in general, is not just for the top of the ticket. It's not just about the presidency of the United States. It's about all the things that we are challenged with. You know, statewide and locally in Sonoma County, there's a host of tax-related measures and other questions. We have 12 propositions on the California state ballot, and we can talk about some of those during the Q&A as well, if you would like. But I say this every 4 years. In many respects, this is the most important election because it's the most recent election. This is not one to sit out. We have a huge number of issues internationally and domestically that we will need to tackle in the coming year. and in the coming years and in the coming decades. And whoever is elected president will either continue a program, if it's Donald Trump, that has been set over the last 4 years, or we're going to have a president in Joe Biden who's going to reset the clock in a different way. Many of the Trump initiatives will go away almost immediately and be turned in a different direction. And so when people go to the polls, they have to take into account all of those things. But I leave you and leave this portion of the talk today with something that I talk about a lot on college campuses and elsewhere. People will always say, I've never seen things so bad or whatever. And I always remind people, we are a big, broad-shouldered nation. It hasn't been calm since the day this republic was founded. I remember giving a talk to a couple hundred people, and the subject was a Congress divided. And an elderly gentleman stood up during the Q&A and said to me, Brian, he said, I'm 70 some years old, and I have never seen this country so divided. I've never seen Congress so divided. And I said, that's interesting. I said, does, 1859 ring a bell? Does, 1917, 16 ring a bell? Does 1939 ring a bell? Does 1968 ring a bell? And by this point, the audience was laughing, and he looked at me, he says, no, I see your point. You're right. I remember interviewing the famed aviator, Jimmy Doolittle, who led the bombing raid on Japan and during World War II, and for which he was awarded the Medal of Honor. I interviewed Doolittle for a magazine story, and we were talking about this very subject and the division in the American people around issues. And he started telling me about 1939 and 1940 with the America First movement. These were people who were isolationists, who didn't want us involved in these foreign wars. And he said to me on December 6th, 1941, America was a divided nation down the middle. He said on December 7th, 1941, we were as one people. And that we saw again after 9/11. We have these seminal events in our history that draw us all back together. We are divided around what we want for this country, which is a fulfillment of the best things we can bring out of ourselves and out of our fellow citizens. It's a work in progress. It always will be a work in progress. And so I'm an optimist. I'm never a pessimist about this country. And I think whatever happens on election day, we will move forward and continue to try to perfect this union of ours. With that, I'll say thanks and look forward to chatting with you during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Brian. Great perspective and great talk. Appreciate that. Lynn?
Yes, thank you very much. And we'll see you all this coming Sunday at 11.
Very good.
That do the job for you?